All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another Azul video. So, a while ago, in fact, about a year ago, I recorded a video about controlling the end of the round. And at the time, I had made this Google Doc with all these screenshots of common scenarios and how to handle them. And it was not ideal for conveying these scenarios. But now we have the Azul sandbox. And again, this is part of the Chrome extension. You can open a sandbox. So now I can remake this video and do it the right way. So I think this is maybe the most critical skill in Azul, or at least a must-have skill if you want to progress to, the master level and above. And there are scenarios that are relatively common that I see, master level players, 600 level players, still getting wrong. So this is not just for lower ELO players, but this skill is pretty universal. And why this is so important is that really, if you take -8 or -11 or -14 in a round of an Azul game, that might just cost you the game. That might just be it. And so you have to be aware every round of what vulnerabilities you have when it comes to ending up with the last selection, and how to avoid it. So in all of these scenarios, I've only filled out one of these boards, and I will kind of talk through, whose turn it is and what the scenario is. And I've tried to keep the scenarios consistent as we grow in complexity. So you'll see this board structure a lot. And so the idea is that this player cannot play white tiles. So they have tiles played on rows 1, 2, and 3. They have tiles played on row 5, and they've completed row 4 white. And there are 4 white tiles currently in the center. So if this player were to go last, they would pick up these 4 white tiles as negatives, and that would be a huge problem for them. So that is the scenario. Now, I guess we'll get, I'll talk about some other things later, but we're going to start super basic and then work our way up in complexity. So this is the most basic scenario. So if it is, let's just say this is me. If it is my turn, and there are 5 colors left, then I will end up with these 4 whites, right? So I take 1 black, my opponent takes something, I take whatever 1 blue, my opponent takes the reds, and then I have to throw out the whites. So that is the 5 color scenario if it's my turn. Note that the same thing is true if there are only 3 colors left. So if there's 3 colors left and it's my turn, I take a black, my opponent takes a blue, I take the whites. And then, of course, it's the same with 1 color left. If it's just the whites left, obviously, those are what I'm taking. So the key thing is if there's an odd number of colors, and it is your turn, you will end up with the last pick. Of course, if there are an even number of colors and it's your turn, then you will not take the last pick. So here, I take a black, my opponent takes blue or yellow, I take blue or yellow, and my opponent takes the whites. So just to illustrate, my opponent ends up with the whites. So if it is your turn and there are odd number of colors left in the middle and all the factories are empty, you're going to end up with the last pick. If there's an even number, your opponent's going to end up with the last pick. And of course, if it's my opponent's turn, when there's 5 colors in the middle, or 3 or 1, then they will end up with the last pick. So whoever's turn it is, when there's an odd number of colors in the middle, is going to go last. That is the super fundamental, must understand part of this. Okay, so now we go to the next level of complexity, which is that there is one factory remaining. So in the last scenario, it was just the tiles in the middle. Here, we've added one factory. So again, here we have 4 colors in the middle, and the 5th one is on this factory. So if it is my turn, and I don't want to end up with these whites, then I want to make sure that there are 5 colors in the middle. Or I want to make sure that there are 3 colors in the middle. But clearly I can't do that, right? Because there's already 4 of them. So I need to put this red into the center in a way that doesn't eliminate another color. And I can do that in one of 3 ways in this scenario. I can take a blue, I can take a white, or I can take a yellow. So for example, if I take a yellow, that's 5 colors in the middle. It's now my opponent's turn. I will not end up with these 4 whites. If for some reason I take the blue, same thing, 5 colors in the middle. And of course, same thing if I take the white, 5 colors in the middle. So the thing that I would not want to do here, for example, is take the yellow from the center. If I take the yellow from the center, my opponent can now put 5 colors in the middle, and it's my turn. So I'm going to end up with these whites. So you have to be aware of when you're in danger and how to counteract that danger appropriately. So we see taking a white or taking a yellow from the factory is fine, but taking a yellow from the center is dangerous. And this is a case where, maybe your opponent has a white here, for example. And you're like, man, I don't want to, well, white's a bad example. There's 3 of them here. Let me pick something else. I don't know, maybe your opponent has a blue. This is a better example. So your opponent has a blue, and you're like, oh, I don't want to group these 2 blues up. Like, I don't want to take a yellow from the factory because then my opponent's going to fill their row 2 blue, or their row 3 blue. And that's a legitimate concern. But you have to consider the alternative, which is, if you take here, now your opponent takes 1 blue, and sure, they're not going to fill this row because you can take this other blue away, but you're going to get dumped with these 4 white tiles. So all that to say, this is the one factory scenario. And of course, things change depending on what's in the middle, but the thing that you need to look out for is whether there's going to be, in this case, like an even number of tiles in the center, or if you're going to put your opponent in a position, make there be an odd number or an odd number of colors in the middle. So like here, it never makes sense for you to take red, but we should know taking red is bad because now there's an even number of colors and it's our opponent's turn. So they'll take something, we take something, they take something, we're stuck with the whites. So we want to really make sure that we end up with 5 colors in the middle in this scenario. So that is the one factory. Let's just still call it like a 5-color example. We're going to get into scenarios with 4 colors pretty soon here. Okay, let's move on to the next one. And this is where we're going to get into a discussion on 4 factories or 4 colors. So here there's 2 factories left. And this is where things are getting a little more complicated. And they're going to get even more complicated, but you already have to be thinking about your end of round scenario at this stage where there are 2 factories left. In fact, you actually have to be thinking about your end of round scenario when there are 3 factories left, and that's going to be the next one. But I think that's a question a lot of people have is, when do I actually need to start thinking and planning for this? And the answer is generally like when there's 3 factories left and it's your turn, you should look out. But anyway, on to this scenario. So, a couple things here. Obviously, we maybe want yellow again. And here, we could take from the center, and you might think, okay, I'm safe. Like, what can my opponent do? And this is where we get into the 4-color rule. So the problem with this play is that if you're I'm not actually playing the round. That's what's happening. Okay, so we take from the center. We think we're safe. Like, what can they do? There's still 2 factories left. But if there are 4 colors in the middle and the 5th color is not available on the remaining factory, then you cannot force your opponent into a last pick scenario. So let's look at it. So it's my turn. There's 4 colors in the center, and the 5th color is not available. So let's say I take a black. Then my opponent takes a black. I'm going to end up with the last pick. Let's say I take 2 blues. Then my opponent takes 2 blues. I end up with the last pick. Let's say I take the yellow. Now my opponent can take any of these colors, and I end up with the last pick. So basically, when you're in, you want to put your opponents in this scenario, because then they can't force things on you. But this is a bad scenario to be in. As we just saw, anything you take, the opponent can then take that same color from the factory, and then you get, there's only 3 colors left, and you're going last. So again, if I take black, they take black, 3 colors left, I'm going last. If I take blue, they take blue, 3 colors left, I'm going last. You're never taking white here, and then if you take the yellow, they can take any of these colors, and I'm going last. So we can't take a yellow from the center, because then they get to use the 4-color trick on us. And the way to identify this is just, if there's a 5th color that can be eliminated after your move. So in this case, after we take yellow, our opponent can actually eliminate red or yellow. They could take a yellow and end up in the same exact scenario. The fifth color is not present. One factory remains, 4 colors in the center. And just like, it's a little bit hard to demonstrate in this example, but if you do find yourself in this scenario, the thing that you want to do is to take the color from the center that makes it hardest for your opponent to take from the factory. So for example, if my opponent had their board full and they couldn't play blues anywhere, it's better to like take blues here and force them to maybe take 2 negatives if they want to force the last player on me. Okay, so we've learned taking a yellow from here doesn't work. You can deduce that taking a yellow from here doesn't work because then there's 5 colors in the middle. And so then our opponent can take anything from this factory and there will be 5 colors in the middle. So this just gets back to the previous scenario, right? This is 5 colors, 1 factory left. So that doesn't work. What if I take a black here? Again, we have the 5 colors, 1 factory scenario. Not all 5 colors are in the center, but my opponent can put the 5th color in the center and I'm in trouble again. So we've exhausted all of the plays that we would reasonably want to make. Nothing works. What's correct? So the correct thing here is to create the 4 color scenario for our opponent. So the correct thing is actually to take a red and in this, scenario, dump it. Okay. So now there's no way for our opponent to force us to take these whites. And again, I showed it from our perspective, but no matter what our opponent takes, if they take a black, we take a black, and then it's their turn, right? 2, 4, boom, they get the whites. If we take, it's their turn, right? So if they take 2 blues, we take 2 blues, they end up with the whites. So this 4 color scenario is like super critical because it is not intuitive. I don't think a lot of players recognize this scenario under the 700 level. And even some 700s probably don't recognize this scenario. But this is a really key one in manipulating the end of the round. And again, like there's always trade-offs. So, in this scenario, you created a group of 2 yellows. You're maybe not going to get your row 3 yellow, but you have to trade off if that is worse than ending up with, 5 whites and going -11. And it's probably worse to go -11. So, okay, so that's the two factory scenario and the introduction to the 4 color rule. The other thing to note is that, again, everything is actually about even number of colors and odd number of colors. So this is actually also the 2 color rule. It is less common, but if I throw away a bunch of tiles, so let's say this is the scenario now. Well, I guess I need something like this. Let's say this is the scenario now. Again, if it is my opponent's turn, they cannot force me to go last, right? No matter what they do, I can force them to go last. So if they take 3 whites, I take 2 whites. They end up with the blues. If they take 2 blues from the factory, then I get my pick of 2 blues and they go last. If they take 2 blues from here, I take 2 blues, they go last. So you can think about it as the even color rule, but most commonly it shows up as 4 colors. You will see the 2 color scenario occasionally. It's a good one to know. Um, so for example, if these were back on the factory, and then there was a third color, the way I could create the 2-color rule is by taking the third color. And now we're back to the scenario I just showed. So that's the 4-color rule and the 2-color rule. So now we will move on to the 3 factory scenario. And probably thinking, there's so many tiles out there. How can I possibly get stuck if there's 3 factories left? But I made a small change to the scenario. So there was previously a yellow in the center. I have now moved that yellow to a factory. And so maybe you can see where this is going, but if it's my turn and I take either of these yellows, oops, I have to play. If it's my turn and I take either of these yellows, I'm putting myself in danger of getting 4-color ruled. Now my opponent can take the 5th color. There's only 4 colors left in the center. There's no way for me to force them to take these whites. I take 2 black, they take 1 black, me, them, me. I end up with the whites. So even when there's 3 factories left, and you think, okay, like I'm not going to get stuck, or they can't force me into anything, because of the 4-color rule, you need to be careful. You cannot take a yellow here. Taking a yellow puts you at risk of getting 4-color ruled, and there's nothing you can do at this point. So the way to play here might be to take from the center, for example, and then let your opponent do something. Obviously, we don't have an opponent's board in this case, so like we can't play through it. But this is why you have to be careful, even at 3 factories remaining, when there's still a lot of plays left in the round. So hopefully that makes sense. I know this was relatively quick, but you can replay these scenarios. The main thing takeaway from this video, I think, is the 4-color rule, because that is the non-intuitive one. When there's 1 factory left and 5 colors, like people have that one figured out. 1 factory left, 3 colors, no problem. But it's scenarios like this where people don't realize they can get caught. They're like, woohoo, fill in my row 3, I'm good. And then someone takes this yellow and all of a sudden they're going to eat 5 whites. So if there were a 4th factory, you cannot get forced at that point. So I would say, as a rule of thumb, start thinking about this. Watch out for the 4-color rule when there's 3 factories left. Obviously, if there's 4 factories, you can still be planning ahead for the end of the round scenario, but 3 is when you can get forced. You can't get forced at 4, but you can get forced at 3. The other thing to remember is that all of this is predicated on the vulnerabilities of your board. So we have been talking about ending up taking these white tiles that we can't play in every scenario. And if I edit this and just take away this row 4 white from my board, none of this matters really. I mean, it all still matters, but now playing whites, playing a large group of whites isn't as big of a problem. So it's good to, at the beginning of the round, identify what your vulnerabilities are. As you play through the round, recognize how they are changing. So, if I had played these 2 yellows earlier in the round, maybe at the beginning of the round I said, oh, I'm okay on whites. I can play whites on row 3 if it comes to it. So it's not that bad. But then at some point in the round, I take 2 yellows. Now I can no longer play whites on row 3, and I need to be extra careful. So always be monitoring your vulnerabilities. Always be monitoring your opponent's vulnerabilities. And once you get to 3 factories, start planning. And now that you know the 4 color rule, you can start using it against your opponents. So when your opponent does this, maybe you don't really need this yellow tile for your board, whatever your board looks like, but you recognize like, ooh, I can get them to -14 with, or -11 with these 6 whites. And I'll sacrifice some other priority for that. Like I'm going to use the 4 color rule here to screw my opponent over. So that is hopefully controlling the round in a nutshell, the end of the round in a nutshell, with better quality examples than I previously recorded. If you still have questions on this, feel free to post in the comments and I'll try to answer them and show some scenarios. But the main thing to remember, in my opinion, is the 4 color rule. Obviously, like if you don't know the odds and evens rules, the really simple ones, then those will be super helpful. But those will come pretty quickly to you. Those will become very intuitive. It's the 4 color rule that takes a while to get used to, both avoiding and using against your opponent. So I hope this was helpful. And thank you again to Code Ninja for the sandbox. It made this topic much easier to demonstrate than I was previously able to. So yeah, that's it, and see you next time.